when you're watching a character in a movie in the shit and you're enjoying it, that character might not be enjoying it, but you're enjoying it, watching them going, wow, this is riveting. This is fucking, wow. Like, I can't believe the writer put him through this shit. You just don't know that your fucking amazing suffering is incredible because you're in the shoes of the character experiencing the suffering. But if you stepped back and you looked at your life as the masterpiece of art that it is, you would begin to see that, hey, there's something in this that's fucking epic. And this is the thing is like, yeah, but the artist, in a way, like we give ourselves permission to do it in our art, but I don't know if we always give ourselves permission to do it in our life.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
It's that time, that sweet podcast time. You know what, Evan? This one's interesting because we're all, you and I, maybe some other people, we're working on this this whole thing of the mundane, you know, the almost the benign, the stuff that almost seems like it doesn't matter, and how creativity can actually flourish out of that. And I think there's something really interesting in this conversation. So creativity in the mundane, something along those lines is what we're calling this. It's interesting, you know, as I'm working on a novel. So this, I've worked on a few novels before, and I've never actually completed a novel. It's just been something where I'll get usually several, eight or nine chapters in, and then I kind of disband the project. Mostly because I don't know how to write a novel properly. But I've written many scripts, many television series, and I've written plays. I've written just about everything but a novel. And novel writing has some demands on you as a writer that these other mediums don't. So there is a certain kind of pushing me out of my comfort zone that's occurring. But I've been learning a lot, and I've been developing my skill as a writer, developing my ability to actually describe things and kind of give an experiential narrative. Because in screenwriting, you don't really describe a lot of details. You kind of just stick to like what's seen, what's heard, and what's seen and what's heard. And you leave it at that, and you try not to do any more than that. And if you are going to do it, you got to sneak it in there, and you got to be very subtle. Otherwise, your script, it's just not, first of all, it's not professional. And second of all, it just doesn't really work because it's never going to get captured. And also, you might be imposing yourself in a way that isn't good. So you got to be careful of that. Anyway, so I've been working on this novel, and it's very well worked out. I've used all my story structure stuff, you know, plot points, the sequences, the beats, the act structure. Everything is just, it's like ready to be a movie if you need it to be. But I'm writing it as a novel. And what I'm finding very interesting in the process is that writing a novel opposed to writing a script is so much even more like the acting process. So like when you're writing a script, what I find a lot of the time is you're getting into the flow of dialogue, you know, and then sometimes action, like what would I do here? How would I work this out? You know, and then the dialogue it's like this bouncing back and forth, especially with playwriting. You just, you know, you're bouncing back and you're kind of filling in the gaps almost without thinking about them. You're just kind of like focusing almost on the feeling. With the novel writing, what ends up happening, I'm finding, is like there's these details. Like, for example, I have this detective character who leans down and like, you know, and I'm watching him like I'm watching a movie, and then I notice that like the edge of his coat like dips into the puddle of the water underneath him, and like in a novel, there's almost like this picturesque quality that can kind of come to life. And if you're really tapping into all these other senses, all of a sudden this scene that like nothing is really happening, all of a sudden it's just like you just start to notice the life that is happening, and it becomes incredibly captivating. And as I've been I'm reading too while I'm doing this, because I keep reading other novels and reading other things to pull reference from, and just go, how did they do it? How did they explain it? And every writer does things in different ways. And as I'm beginning this process, or really getting into it, I'm starting to go, oh, like this is what I'm getting involved in. And I'll say one other thing before I pass it on to you. So I wrote this first draft of a chapter. Of the first chapter, for example, I wrote the first draft and I'm like, oh man, I love this. This is perfect. I was like, this is the chapter. And then I was like, well, maybe I could rewrite it. So I just took like some things that I'm like, hey, if you really were going to enhance this, what would you do? And so I investigated some stuff. And I go, well, let's try and rewrite this chapter, but let's just rewrite it with these things in mind now. And holy shit, did it just go up another level? And I was like, not much changed, but my attention. All of a sudden, I started paying attention to things, and I started to think about, now that I had that first run through, I started to think about, well, what else matters? And then the whole thing just becomes more alive. It's just very, very interesting. Anyway, I figured I'd start off with that because this is part of my creative journey, and I think it's good sometimes we share ours, right? But I'll pass it on to you. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. Just that you gave that example, like the little detail of like the coat of, just like dipping into like this little puddle of water. Cause like, part of a great novel is because it's not a visual medium, it's an imaginative one. And you have to give enough details to spark the imagination into creating that image, right? Because you're not being fed the image. And it's those little, like as we're talking about these mundane details, but it's those mundane details that actually make the thing living and breathing, which isn't mundane at all, which is kind of the interesting part that I'm interested in exploring in this conversation, is that I think that that's to a large degree part of, it's a life thing. I think it's what art does a lot of the time, no matter what the medium is it takes a lot of things that seem very ordinary, and that we take for granted. And it just points out how kind of incredible these things actually are. Even comedians, right? Like how much material do comedians come up with that is just based on everyday mundane bullshit? And they go, hey, have you ever thought about this? And you go, oh, holy shit, yeah. Like, and suddenly there's this great joke, there's laughter, and there's something incredibly creative that comes out of just paying some attention to these things that we just oftentimes don't give second thought to. And in many ways, that's like what a lot of art and artists do, is give attention to these little things about life, because there's all kinds of little treasures in the little things about life. Like you think about, that you brought up, maybe it wasn't in the last podcast, and it might have been the one before, but you were talking about Good Will Hunting because you've been rewatching some movies. I mean, that's such a fantastic movie. Like that's, to me, like that one, every single time I watch it, I go, this has got to be in my top 10 for sure. Right. But there's this great monologue, not the one in the park, but there's this great monologue that Robin Williams has where he's talking to Will about his wife and how she used to fart in her sleep, which apparently he improvised, I think, but he's talking about like this, like how she used to fart in her sleep, she's farting in the bed. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of humorous and funny, but he's tells Will kind of at the end of that whole thing is like, oh, no, that's the real stuff. That's the real intimacy, because those are the things that only I knew about. Right? Like those are like, that was, and it's like a reframe of this little thing. It's like, oh, my wife used to fart in her sleep, and it's suddenly this beautiful thing that comes out of it. Right? And I think that a lot of the issues that I see with a lot of particularly in storytelling right now, and especially in a lot of the visual mediums, of film and episodic stuff, is that like they're always in such a hurry. It seems to like get to what in their heads is the big thing, is the important thing. And it's like, well, just take some time and show us this thing. Yeah. Right. And I want to just bring an example, because it just jumped into my head and it won't go away. So I'm going to share it. Yeah. The opening scene from Inglourious Bastards. So spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Inglourious Bastards, and its incredible opening scene, which even when I remember seeing it, I was like, what is going on here? Right? It's this long conversation at the beginning of a Quentin Tarantino movie, right? It's like this long conversation between this farmer and this Nazi. It's like, what the fuck is going on in this? Right? And as the scene goes on, there's this sort of unraveling that's happening, which leads to like this discovery that this farmer is hiding Jewish people like in his farm, underneath, like in his basement, in his cellar. And this guy's basically saying like, I know you're keeping people, but there's this whole thing that happens before this reveal even occurs. Right? And like, look, that's a pretty, like, here's the thing. It's a significant part of that movie because he makes it significant. So many people would rush through that whole thing, right? It's just like, oh, well, no, it's like, we just a quick 5-minute scene where it comes in, they round up, they kill all these people, right? Like it's, and then we're going to get to the stuff where the guys come in, like the guys who are the real hunters come in and blah. It's like, no. We're going to take our time and show you just how fucking crazy this situation is. Because it is crazy. Right? Where you've got this guy who's pretending that he's just an innocent farmer, and this other guy who's just like, I know what you're up to. I know what you're doing. Right? But there's this whole thing that plays out, and it's like, to me, it's one of the great opening scenes in movie history. Like, I'd put that probably in a top 10 in my list. Like, and as far as openings to movies, that one's pretty spectacular, right? But that's like, and you could argue, I guess, that that's not really a mundane thing, but that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make, is that it's like, no, exactly, it's not mundane. But in the context of like a lot of what we think of what's exciting for in a story, it could easily get overlooked, right? And to me, the great storytellers are the ones who can see, it's like, no, we have to really sit with this and really let's explore and expand and express and find out what this situation would actually look like, right? And let's really explore all the humanity that would be going on, all of the, the sizing up, the figuring out, the parsing away, like what would that actually be like and look like? And suddenly you go, holy shit, this is absolutely riveting. But you might miss it if you're thinking that something's mundane. There might be something really special there.
Yeah, well, you bring up a really important point, which is that we got to be careful of our judgment of what is not worth looking at. I think that's such an important part of this. And to go back to the comedian thing, I mean, I would say most of the best comedic jokes are usually about very mundane stuff. And that's the thing, is they get us, like, great comedians often get us to look at stuff that's like innocuous. It's like you don't even notice it's there, and then all of a sudden they get you to pay attention to it, and you're like, wow, there is something to that, and and I'd say, like, for a lot of comedians, like, there's this is said amongst the comedian community, which is that when you start to like succeed, or you start to like move up as a comedian, there's a struggle with some of your work, because you start talking about mundane life as a comedian, and people can't relate to it anymore because they don't Like they don't know what it's like to be in a different hotel every night, traveling to a different city or do it, like that's just not normal, right? Whereas like comedians early on who are kind of like, they're working a part-time job and then they're doing comedy on the weekends. Sometimes their material is better because they're tapping into something that people can connect to. And I think, one thing that's very interesting, like I'm working on like basically a sci-fi type of project here with this one. And it's like any project really. It's all the same. It always comes down to the same problem. You are in a world that people don't actually live in. Like, if you're writing James Bond or something like that, or you're doing something like this, like most people aren't in that world. So we don't really get what it's like. And I think one of the things about the mundane is that when you are able to investigate how that's real, that's what brings the life of it to the audience member, where they go, I get it. I'm in this world. I feel the normal thing that's going on. One of the things that I like, this novel that I'm working on, it gets crazy. Like it gets wild, twists and turns, and some fucking big stuff happens. But the thing is like early on in the stage, like setting the stage of this world, I need you to feel what it's like to live in this futuristic society. I need you to have a sense of what it's like to be, like a police officer or a detective in what's perceived to be a utopia, how does this work? What's your daily routine like, and then, and there's certain things that I think people can relate to. Like there's almost fundamental things. Like you find anchors, like this problematic relationship he has with his son, and like, and his wife and his sister, and, these relationships. And you're like, wow, this could be told at any time. It doesn't really matter if it's in this futuristic world or if it's happening in the past. Like these are human relationships, and the mundane quality of like, you're not home, you're late. Like we need you, things like that. They're very like almost things that are in and of themselves don't sound interesting, but they bring a flavor and a color and a texture to everything. Right. And, I think the thing is like, if you took that out, you just got a detective trying to solve a case. It just gets really fucking boring. It really does. It's the human relationships. It's the daily routine. It's the dealing with the bureaucracy and all of this stuff. Like all that sounds super fucking boring. But when you put it in the context of what happens, all of a sudden it makes what's happening in this story, it makes it special, because the context of the mundane makes what happens, it draws its attention. Alan Watts, we refer to him a lot. Alan Watts always points out, like, if you have a shape, you can only see the shape by the background in which is contrasting it. So, we don't think of the background as anything that matters, but I'd say the mundane is a lot of the background. You have to establish what you're putting your thing up against. And until you put it up against something that is almost innocuous and almost invisible, this thing has something to contrast against. And so, like Good Will Hunting, just one last thing I'm going to say. Good Will Hunting, I always remembered like the moment where Will and like Sean, the therapist, where like they have this big breakdown moment and finally they get to it. And finally it's like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. And like, I remember this being like, this is the big scene of the movie. And it is a big scene in the movie. But when I rewatched it, emotionally, I didn't feel a lot. It was like, I was like, wow, that's a really like great scene, but I didn't feel very much. The scene where I felt and like literally couldn't help myself but have a tear come to my eye was the scene where it's him and Skylar, and they just wake up in her like in her little, like, what is it called? Her dorm, and they're just talking, and then they kind of end up getting into this fight. That scene fucking pulled my heartstrings. And I think the thing is that it's like, if it didn't have this quality of like, this is just another day of they've been dating, they're hanging out, and and now they're just talking about something, and all of a sudden this triggers something against the mundane, and then boom, 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 all of a sudden, whoa, where are we? What's happening? Whoa, this is life and death. Like everything is just, but without the context, without the, and at this point, we've earned this emotion because we understand something about Will, and there's things that we don't even understand about him. There's things we don't even understand about Skylar. There's things we don't understand about these characters, but they're coming out in this moment. But there's enough that we understand, and we're starting to piece it together, and we're getting, this is why this is so hard. And like up until then, I mean, if you rewatch Good Will Hunting, you don't understand. You have no context. You don't like, well, you have context, but you have no understanding of how much trauma and hurt Will has. But then in this scene, all of a sudden, and that's been all normalized. It's all just been like, yeah, that's my normal life. I'm just in trauma. I'm angry. I'm whatever. I'm trying to do my life. And then all of a sudden, this moment hits on a vulnerability, and you start to see, whoa, this is the fucking monster that's been hiding under the bed the whole time. And it was just like normal up until then, and this is the thing I think which is so interesting about this conversation is that you got to set the situation up by appreciating the mundane so that you can have the special thing happen. And I would agree with you. And this is the last thing I'll say. Most of the issues with story today is they just want to get to the monster. And it doesn't fucking work because it's not scary. It doesn't matter. It's not impactful. But if you set up context, then that monster becomes pretty fucking spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do that because in a way, it's like we actually bond through the mundane. Yes. Like we do bond through like the big things too, but it's like you said, there's always that sense of context of everything because it's so many of those little mundane things that we can relate to each other, and that builds like a rapport, that builds a kind of relationship, right? Which is, part of the thing. It's like, a lot of people oftentimes like, they shit on small talk, right? But sometimes it's like, hey, let's just talk about some mundane things. Like, where do we just connect on a certain kind of level? And like, I get it. Sometimes, yeah, you can, if it stays stuck there, that can be a limit. That can put a ceiling on how deep you can go into a relationship, right? But I think it's also still a necessary part of it, right? Like it's like, I love being able to have, I love that I have people in my life that I can just jump into all kinds of things with, right? Like with you, we can just bullshit about, fucking hockey, and which is just really a bunch of nonsense to a large degree. It's like, yeah, let's talk about hockey, what's going on, players, whatever. It's like, yeah, okay, cool, fun. That's a lot of fun. I enjoy it and whatever. And then we can get into conversations like this, and we can get into, what the fuck's going on with each other and get into that thing too. It can't be all of that shit all of the time though, one thing or the other, right? But there's something that is essential to both of these things. And like you're saying, you can't put a judgment on these things, or it's not a good idea to put a judgment on one of these things being superior to the other, because they each have a kind of role to play in the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking, like, you're talking about like movies that, like, that scene getting you. I just recently rewatched Inside Out with my wife. She really wanted to watch it, and it's just like, that movie makes me cry harder every single freaking time that I see that thing. Like, it's just like, it tugs at my heartstrings more and more each time, and it's like, I don't know if I necessarily have a place to go with that there, but it's making me think about, like, just this conversation that we're having is making me think about, like, well, yeah, what's sort of like the mundaneness of it. Like, this is like, essentially, if you think of, you could argue that I guess it has two lead characters. There's Riley, the little girl, and then there's Joy, who's the figure inside her, but really like the story is about a girl who's moved to a new city. A little girl who's moved to a new city. And there's this drama that's unfolding in that whole process, right? And it's like it's catastrophic, right? Like this, like every component of this, like what this girl knew, you know, Goofball Island, Family Island, like all these islands that are built inside of her are fucking just coming down. They're all being destroyed. Like it's just like it's intense, man. And then there's all of these memories that are being lost, and Joy is down there grieving about all of these things that are gone, that they're disappearing, and this like desperation for Joy to come back. You know, that was something that I picked up this time watching it. I was like, oh, it's interesting is that like there's space for all of these emotions, but Joy is always the one who's trying to get back into the driver's seat. And I was like, oh, it's like that movie is such a gem. But like, yeah, like thinking of it in that context of this is a story just about a little girl who's left her home, her family's moved to the other side of the country, and she's having to readjust. Like and how often, you know, did we see the new kid, you know, from some other place in class growing up, right? And how much did we really think about a lot of that stuff, what that's like, what's going on for that person? But it's like it's a story where they really get into it, where they really, it's like, well, hang on, like this is not a nothing thing. That's a big thing in a young person's life to have happen. It's a big thing to have happen in an adult's life, let alone a child's, right? So there's something that I find so fascinating in this. It's like, yes, it's because it's like the mundane and the ordinary is like, it is still both ordinary, but also not ordinary at all, right? Like it both provides contrast, and yet it is also the thing that it's in contrast to. Does that make sense? Like it's because when you go into it, it's not just ordinary anymore. It's extraordinary, right? When you really explore it. And so it's like it can do all kinds of things, right? It can just take the place of being something that you can set something really crazy against, right? To just show how wild and crazy something is. But then at the same time, if you decide to go into it, that thing, it becomes the wild and crazy thing. Does that make sense? Am I in?
A little further, actually.
Oh God.
Well, no, just investigate it.
Well, I don't know how much more I can explain that with other than what I've already said. But it's like, because what it seems to be as we're talking about this, it's like, okay, well, we can have the ordinary and the mundane function in an aspect that it just provides sort of a baseline, right? Like it's kind of ordinary, it's understandable, it's relatable, it doesn't rock anything too much, so that when something big does come and rock it, it has more impact, it has more weight. But at the same time, you could choose to look at that thing that is ordinary, instead of using it as something to contrast something extraordinary to, you can take a close examination and exploration of that thing, and suddenly that thing comes to life. Right. And you realize just how incredible it actually is, right? And that's sometimes like that, for me, that's in art, that's one of the most magical things that can happen, is when something that seems so ordinary is shown for just how extraordinary it actually is, right? Like, I just think about in my own life, like the other day, I try and set a kind of intention. I've been on like an intention kick at the start of every day to set some kind of my wife and I call it a peaceful intention of some kind for the day. And I had one the other day, which was just like, my intention is just to enjoy whatever it is that I'm doing with my family today. Not try and be somewhere, like think that we need to be somewhere else or going off and doing something, or just whatever is happening and whatever it is that we're doing, I'm just going to try and be present with it and enjoy it, right? And it's like there's just, and throughout the day, there was just times when I was just being silly and playing with my kid, and he's just laughing, and it's like, we're just at our house, you know, like it's just kind of like every day, but I just had this added level of presence with it. And I was just, there were moments throughout the day where I was just like, I was almost overwhelmed with how rich everything was, like how rich this moment was. Like, we don't need to be in some fucking, you know, in some other country and doing some kind of wild thing. We're just laughing and playing and having a good time on the couch right now. It's like, and it's so ordinary. It's so ordinary in my life, right? But it's like, that's kind of the problem, is when we just is when we start to just see it as ordinary. Anyhow, I hope I made my point.
I have an interesting thought for you, which is that your ordinary is someone else's dream. And I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind, because everything just gets normalized. You know, you start living your dream, it becomes normal, and you start to get. So something I heard the other day was like this whole idea: if you want to stop suffering, make peace with the fact that desire never ends. And I think this is a very interesting idea. You're gonna find that you always desire something, whether it's to go to sleep and eat nice food, or whether it's to, you know, write a novel or travel to Europe or do whatever it is, right? You're going to have these desires, and you know, some people can call them desires, some people can call them whims, whatever, but they're there, right? And a lot of our suffering comes with the fact that we feel like we can't have what it is that we want. But what you want is always contextualized by what you have. So when you stop wanting what you have and you start wanting what you don't have, you have suffering. And suffering is an interesting thing, because it's not all bad. Like, you know, like part of like the passion is in the suffering. You know, like you need to almost access the pain a little bit. And like artists, like people who have committed to the artist path, they're quite well acquainted with this idea. You know, this whole idea of the suffering artist is very true, but it's like I don't think that all artists are necessarily suffering going like, oh, this is so bad. It's like they like that suffering. And that's part of, like, I have this novel in my mind, right? And I've spent, I don't know how long developing this one particular story amongst others, but I want to see it on the bestseller shelf. You know, I want to see the title page. I want to see that book. I want it to be done. I want to have all the chapters completed. I want this to be done. But then when it's done, I'm going to be like, I got to write my next thing. And it always works this way. It's worked like that with every script. It's worked like that with everything. And it's like, oh, if you're an actor, it's like, okay, I want to get those kind of auditions that really, for really great roles. And you start getting those, I just want to book that part. Okay, I booked that part. And it's like, I want to do this. I want to do a great job. And you do that great job. And then you just have desire. You just want and want and want. And the thing is you have to make peace with the fact that the suffering you choose is the suffering you want to suffer about. It's the stuff that you want to be in pain about. I mean, man, I want my next motorcycle. Like I wake up every morning and I want it. And it's like, oh, can I just have it already? And I think about this, like, I want to do this trip to Alaska and I want to go travel the island and I want to go want to go on these adventures, and I want it. And I'm just like, I have this burning desire, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it. And I'm getting little like bits of it, and pieces of it are coming together, but some pieces of it are so fucking hard to just seem to get, you know? And then every time I get close, like something fucking happens, and I'm like, and it hurts. But like, when I stop to really think about it, like that's just my life. This is mundane, but it's like, this is fucking passion, man. This is excitement. This is like, I'm like alive, concerned about this. But if it wasn't this motorcycle, it would just be the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I think about when I'm in pain and I'm just like, oh, this is horrible. Like this is some horrible shit that I'm dealing with. It's, so another thought that passed by me over this week was the idea that your suffering is like filtered through really two different types of things. You either have anxiety or you have anticipation. And those things are based on what you believe is going to happen. And if you believe that you're going to end up with the thing you don't want, you're going to be in anxiety, which is fear. And if you believe that you're going to have the thing you want, you're going to be in anticipation. But anticipation and anxiety are both just two sides of the same coin of suffering. And the thing is the suffering sucks when you're in anxiety, because you're just like, I don't think I'll ever get it. I don't think it'll ever work out. And I'm having doubt, right? That's where the doubt is. But if you have, faith, you have anticipation, because you're like, yeah, it's going to work out. It's just a matter of when. It's just a matter of how. And that's exciting, and it's a different experience. But you're both without. And I think the idea, like one of the problematic ideas of our culture too, I believe, is like we want to numb the mundane. We want to numb the suffering, and we get bored. And like it's a confusion, because actually everything right now is just fucking awesome. Even when you're in the absolute shit, but it's that's the growth. Like you have to almost see it. So like, I'll give you an example of why I know this is true. When you're watching a character in a movie in the shit and you're enjoying it, that character might not be enjoying it, but you're enjoying it, watching them going, wow, this is riveting. This is fucking, wow. Like I can't believe the writer put him through this shit. You just don't know that your fucking amazing suffering is incredible because you're in the shoes of the character experiencing the suffering. But if you stepped back and you looked at your life as the masterpiece of art that it is, you would begin to see that, hey, there's something in this that's fucking epic. And this is the thing, is like, yeah, but the artist, in a way, like we give ourselves permission to do it in our art, but I don't know if we always give ourselves permission to do it in our life. And I don't think that's the goal either. And this is the last thing I'll say about this. I don't think the goal is to not suffer. And I think that's the confusion. I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I just want joy. I want happiness. I want to feel the good feeling. But in context of no challenging feelings, what is the good feeling? It's nothing. It's not magnificent. It's not special. Because I hear the story of you and your wife and your kids sitting on the couch, goofing around, playing around. And I think, wow, that sounds fucking awesome. I don't have that. That sounds fucking awesome. What if I never have that? All of a sudden I'm suffering, right? Meanwhile, you're just like, yeah, it's just a fucking day in my life. And normally I don't care about this, but today I paid attention. I was like, yeah, this is pretty great. And I'm sitting here going, wow, that'd be pretty fucking cool to have. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Give it context, You don't know because you're in your shoes. You're living in the character's life, fucking missing the fucking narrative that's going on. And I do this all the time. I think we all do it. I just think that we need to look at the suffering more as it's part of the beauty. I don't know how to put it, it's like, it has something to do with something.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that you said a lot of interesting things there. I do think that there's a large element of sort of self-inflicted suffering that's over complete fucking nonsense. That is totally unnecessary. But I think you parse through some of those things, and the word that came to mind actually was like aching. is that like there's a certain kind of aching that I think is part of the human experience that is really creative and important, right? Like there's like that aching to like, of the artist to like, to do the thing that they do, and it's just like, and this sort of need to satiate that thing. But yeah, it's like know that that's never going to go away, right? Make peace. I like that thought, which is because it's a very provocative statement, right? Because it puts you into place where you really have to change how you think about things and how you're operating about things. It's like, but this thing, I want this thing so badly, or I want to go and do this thing. Or even when I'm doing the thing, there's a place that I want to get to with the thing, like there's this, it just kind of, there's so many layers and levels to it. And then it's just going to, and then it's going to go to another, it's just going to go to another thing. And the idea that it's like, to make peace with that. You go, what? Like, how do you make peace with that thing? Because we have a sort of relationship to it that just like adds a layer of suffering on top of it, right? As opposed to that thing of like, here's this thing that is calling to me, this thing that is pulling me, and having a relationship is like, oh yeah, okay, like let's go, let's just do it, and let's just see what happens, and be okay with whatever comes out of it, right? I think maybe maybe it's that sort of attachment to outcome that creates an added level of unneeded suffering. Because it's interesting, because I'm thinking about like what would that even feel like to make peace with that feeling? Like it's bizarre, right? Like it scrambles the circuits, because it's like the being doesn't know what the fuck to do with that. It's like, no, it doesn't compute, right? Because that's not how we're wired, right? Like anything that's painful in some way to us is just like, no, you just need to get rid of it somehow, right? And find whatever the fastest route to getting rid of it is, as opposed to, I guess, again, like really, really engaging with it, right? Because almost in a way, it's like that's something that we can file into the mundane category, right? Where it's just like, it's just this thing. It's just this, like, even though it's everything, we try and just minimize it, as opposed to like, well, what if you just went into it? What if you actually went into it? What might happen if you actually went into that aching feeling that you have about this thing? And it might just spring up all kinds of stuff. And you, again, you can find a kind of an enjoyment, at which point then you go, it's like, okay, but now is it pain? Is it even aching? Is it even like, or is it something else entirely now? What does that become? I'm just asking these questions because I don't know the answer to that, but it has to be, I just know that has to become something else, because there's something we can rationally follow that line and say, it's like, okay, but if you make peace with the desire, if you make peace with the suffering, if you make peace with the aching, then it's no longer that thing, really. So what does it become?
Well, I like that you reframed it as aching as opposed to suffering. And I think that's a little bit easier to grab onto, because suffering does feel a little bit like torturous. It feels a little bit, I don't know, like who wants to suffer, But like aching, like I can connect with that. I practice intermittent fasting, and you get pretty good at it. The more you do it, the more you get comfortable with the aching pain of like hunger. And because I've become well accustomed to that feeling, I'm always amazed when people like they're fucking suffering about their hunger. And I'm like, well, granted, in fairness, I'm not in your body. I don't know what you feel, but I know, like, I know that fucking hunger pain. And it's like, oh man, holy shit, does it get strong. One thing that I kind of correlate it to more now is thirst. Because when you think hunger hurts, holy shit, try thirst. Whoa. That is another level of like, oh man, holy shit. Like, and you realize pretty quickly, like, why your body needs to be hydrated. I mean, most of us are dehydrated, apparently. We're functioning just like that, and it's normal to us. So there's some degree in which you've already dealt with it. Hunger pain is interesting because, if you can't sustain hunger pain, you're going to have negative effects generally to your body, because you're going to start to put things in your body that aren't good. And there's other nuances to hunger pain, which is interesting, and I kind of want to bring in this aching point of view. Like when your body wants something specific, like it wants sugar, or it wants something sweet, or it wants something savory, and you just know, it wants that, and you're in tune with that. And the itch can't be scratched. There's nothing available. You don't have it. You have to wait. And then that suffering that aching can kind of come in, where it's like, I want this thing. And, I don't keep a lot of junk food around my place. I'm pretty good about that. But every once in a while, man, I just want something sweet. I want some like chocolate, or I want something, and it's rare, but every once in a while, I just want something. Like, it's got to be ice cream or chocolate or something. I just want it. And when it's not here, man, I'll go through a whole fucking thing. Like, I'll go through this whole, I'll keep going back to the cupboards. I'll keep opening up every cupboard, look at every fucking thing I have. I'll open the fridge. I'll stare in the fridge. I'll try and go, can I make this thing satisfy this fucking need? And it's interesting because I feel like this aching we're talking about, it's like, you wouldn't really, like, you want to satiate it, as you put it, satisfy it, but you wouldn't really want it to go away. You want to have it, but at the same time, you want to be able to meet it. And I think I think that's an interesting part of this whole like kind of conversation. Like, we're all dealing with this all the time. Like, say there's a moment where you have this urge to look at your phone, and you shouldn't. But you have this urge. Can you stop that urge? Can you? Because there's certain urges or like cravings, or we suffer because we're bored or whatever, or it's like you need to not do the thing, and that's hard, but that's like where a lot of the character is built. And I think that we look at these things like these grand moments, right? Like they count when they're like some type of like some big opportunity is in front of you, and you resist or whatever. Like, we think of it, but like these little moments of just like not having the sweet food is a big moment in your life. It's a monumental decision. And you can, like, I think one of the things about art that art has taught me is that you can begin to appreciate such tiny little details and see how they matter. Man, it was years ago. I remember you said this to me, and I think you got it from somewhere else, but you said it's all grist for the mill, including the mill. We got that from Larry, yeah, who's your teacher. Anyway, that's a big one for me. I always think about that because I'm like, yeah, like, try not to overlook anything. Consider that this is all kind of a part of the whole thing, And it's hard to do at sometimes because you're like so focused on something, right? But if you can kind of like almost like, it's like if you can appreciate the not having in almost the sense that you can appreciate the having, I think there's a kind of a peace in that, right? And you mentioned about this counterintuitive idea of peace is like, I think the problem a lot of the time is we're chasing a feeling instead of chasing like a value or like an ideal or like something, right? And like ideals you can't achieve. And I think that people don't like those because they're like, well, I want to be able to get it. And it's like, you'll never get it. An ideal is like one of those things where it's like, you can get 99.99999% there and you're like almost there, but you'll never quite get it. And the only way it's an ideal is it has to be just a little out of reach. And if it is just a little out of reach, it means there'll be suffering. It means there'll be aching. It means there'll be a thirst or a hunger or something for it. And that's the thing. Like if you don't have ideals and you stop, you like, there's like a death. You know what I mean? I'm talking about this kind of like almost getting into this like heavy idea. The idea is that you're going to get everything, like you get everything you want, and all you're ever going to find out is you want something else. And then the natural question is, well, what's the point of wanting it all? And you go, well, that is the point. To want, and then to go do it, and then to go do the next thing, and then to go do the next thing. And because like, well, or don't, but like either way, this is a part of like life. Like your body's going to keep getting hungry. It's going to keep getting thirsty. It's going to keep needing something. It's going to keep, everything's going to keep happening. And all you're going to do is you're going to temporarily solve it. And that's satisfying. And then you go, okay, great, I satisfied it for now, on to this thing. And then you're going to go do that thing. And then this thing that was satisfied is going to no longer be satisfied. And you're going to go back and meet its demands again. And that's kind of like you have to make peace with that. Because it's like, it's this living thing, And I think, I feel like I'm so far off the fucking plot the way I'm talking. But I feel like that's the thing about like a lot of what we're talking about is that there is something interesting about just being hungry, but we don't think about that all the time, especially if you're in a first world country. You're just like, I just eat. I'm satisfied. I eat. I'm satisfied. And if you don't struggle to feed yourself, you don't even think about it. You don't even acknowledge it. But there are people out there who are struggling to figure out how they're going to put food on the table. They're just struggling, and that's like their biggest concern right now. But for someone else, they might just be like, yeah, I'm just hungry. I just eat. I just buy what I want. I just eat it, And the thing is like that little activity that you do where you just buy what you want, and you eat what you want, that's someone's entire life. Their whole life exists in that realm of like, how am I going to get my next meal? And I know that seems almost foreign to us sometimes, but this is like what I'm saying is we take it for granted. Like, and we're on to the next concern. It's like, well, what iPhone am I going to upgrade to? Meanwhile, this person's thinking like, how am I going to fucking put food on the table for my kids? You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying they're the same thing, but it's like just different context, different world, different focus, different attention point.
Yeah. I mean, they're the same, but I would say that there might be an important distinction there too. But anyhow.
Yeah.
Because one is a real need, a true real need. But I don't necessarily want to dive down into the rabbit hole at the moment. But it's, I can't remember who this was. It was like a famous poet wrote this letter to someone and said like, was talking about like she put it as like there's a divine dissatisfaction in the artist, right? And she was trying to explain that to sort of someone that she was a bit of a mentor to. I wish I could remember her name. Anyhow, for the sake of the conversation, we'll just keep moving. But there's that story always stuck with me. It's like there's a divine dissatisfaction. And I think that there's a place in which you have to look at like, well, where is that ache coming from? Right? Because I think a lot of the time the ache is something we talk about a lot here is coming from an ego. Right? And I think that that's part of the issue is like, are you trying to scratch the the itch of your ego, in which case that can become really tremendous suffering. Like that's really all that comes out of that. But there's this thing that I think that we're really talking about is like the real deep thing, right? The real actual true thing that isn't based on an ego, that doesn't really care about getting and having, cares about doing the thing that you're supposed to do in the world. You know, that thing is something else entirely. You might call that, you know, the soul, you might call that the daemon or something, but it's or the pure is another sort of old term, I think, for this thing that is a part of our, without taking it into like trying to make it like a metaphysical thing, but it's a part of our human experience, right? It's something that we might call transcendent because it's something that actually cuts through a lot of the ego and the outside pressures and influences. And sometimes there's figures that you see, maybe not entirely, but they really kind of embody this thing, right? Like the sort of, I don't know, I just sort of picture almost like who's like, I'm trying to remember his name, almost like a Tom Hardy kind of a guy. Not that he's free of ego, but there's definitely something that's happened with him and who he is as a hell, because there's a part of him that generally just doesn't actually give a fuck about what people think about him. He just seems to be like, yeah, I'm doing the shit that I want to do. I don't really care what happens to it afterwards. You know, I'll meet my contractual obligations because I have to, and that's part of the game that you have to play when you get to a certain place, right? Which he has. But if Tom Hardy was not a famous person, he'd still be pretty much, I think, exactly the person that he is. He'd still be just being like, yeah, I'm doing what the fuck I'm doing. I don't care. Did it do well? No, I don't give a shit. I'm doing something else already. Like his person is not wrapped up in a lot of these things that our ego makes important to us, right? Like he's operating, his base operation is kind of coming from a different place. And again, you know, like he's not like a perfect human being. None of us are perfect human beings or anything, but you know, there's just, I don't know, there's people who kind of embody a certain kind of spirit that I think that's something that we all kind of admire, you know, something that we always like, oh, I wish I could be a bit more like that, right? I wish that I could not care so much about all of this stuff, because it'd be like, yeah, what would happen? What would happen if you stopped caring about, you know, what people thought of you, how well something did, how well something might do, like all of these anxieties and this weight that we put on ourselves. And so we just like, I don't really care, because that's not the point. The point is to do the thing for me, right? That's the thing. That's the juice. That's me. That's the ache, right? I just ache to do the thing. And when I'm doing the thing, right? Like there's a kind of satisfaction that happens, and but then there's the next thing, right? There's the divine dissatisfaction once again. It's just like, okay, I can't just rest on my laurels, even though maybe that thing did actually really well, right? Maybe there was some real, like some success in the world with that thing, because that's again part of the trap. You were talking about it before. Comedians, you know, and I've heard about that too, where comedians say, yeah, that can, when you become like kind of a famous comedian and your job is now just being a comedian, you travel, you're making great money, like just doing that, where it's just like, holy shit, what am I going to talk about? Right? Because like my life now doesn't look like it used to. There's so many things that are so specific about my life that how do I still do this thing that I do and be funny but still be relatable, still talk about things that are funny to people, right? Because my life is like jet setting on airplanes and playing in arenas and concert venues and fucking, like staying in hotels. Like for most people, that's not what their lives look like, And so how do you stay connected to just like those mundane things, right? How do you stay connected to those things that keep us connected, right? And I don't know exactly how I got here again or how I arrived to that thing, but yeah, do you have something?
I do.
Do you have something? All right.
We should probably wrap this one up. Yeah, we will wrap this up, Evan. You know what? Don't cut me short. No, I do think, when you look at like a Tom Hardy or something like that, like he seems very authentic to me. And like I've watched him in some interviews and stuff like that. And I'm like, it just seems like a really, I don't know, authentic, like grounded person. And I know he's flawed like everybody. And I think that's fine, but he like owns it. I think the thing that I'm kind of taking away from this a little bit is that when you don't lose touch of the mundane, it's kind of like, maybe you're trying to escape the mundane. Maybe you don't like your life as it is and you think, oh, maybe when I'm famous, maybe when I'm wealthy, maybe when I have this, then I'll be okay. And that's the ego. That's all the fool's game. And I think, everybody poops. Everybody, everybody has bad breath. They don't brush their teeth or take care of themselves long enough. Everybody's hair gets a little bit, knotted or greasy if they don't wash it, like it's just kind of like, it's like that's happening, right? It's like you're and just because you maybe have the means to take care of yourself or do whatever doesn't mean that you're not one of the the human beings like living through life like that's just flawed and imperfect and dirty and all this stuff that we are, right? And it's like I think when you retain a certain quality of like, you're not a big fucking deal, even if everyone thinks you're a big fucking deal, I think that's part of the, that's kind of like, if you look at an artist, especially like a very successful artist, like, especially like if you look at like someone in the film industry who's like made millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And you look at them and they still continue to put out good work. I think the thing is that person somehow they're somehow in touch with the mundane. They're somehow in touch with the humanity of it all, the humility of it all, the imperfectness of it all. And so I guess that's my final thought is that, I think we spend a lot of time and I, I'll say this one last thing before I share the beer. I spent a lot of my life pursuing a dream, and I really, like, I battle with this sometimes because I'm like, am I foolish? Like, to be so, like, am I indoctrinated in the dream idea? Like, is that not like a thing? And maybe I'm just kind of bought in, like, into this idea. And I'm like, well, no, it's like, dream all you want. Like, have this big, massive vision and this dream and imagine all these fucking incredible things. But at the end of the day, just remember, you're just a kid in his backyard wanting to make a movie with his best friend. That's who you are. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, no matter what happens, at the end of the day, you were just a kid, playing imagination, and you fucking loved it so much you made a career out of it. I mean, that's basically what I did. So if people think that's special, if they think that's cool, if whatever, if that's a dream, it is a dream in a way. I mean, it is cool, and it's not lost on me. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, well, I'm just a fucking guy trying to tell a story here and there, trying to figure, and it's fun, And like I went off and I tried to do a bunch of different shit. I mean, I worked for a steel company, a steel sheeting company. I fucking worked the night shift with a whole bunch of weirdos. I did a whole bunch of different things. I traveled to different places and tried small towns and lived on a farm, and I tried all this different shit. And at the end of the day, I just found like I was still just this kid who just wanted to play imagination and bring that shit to life. And that's just what something inside of me, it just has an aching. I just want to do it. And whether I'm sitting around a campfire telling people a story or I'm trying to write a novel like I'm doing now. Whatever. It's just in me. I want to do it. I for some reason I care about it. It's fun and it fulfills me. And so I think that, it's mundane, but I love it. It just is what it is. I wake up every fucking morning and the first thing I think about is like, okay, let's make a coffee and let's sit down and write. That's the first thing I do every single day. And sometimes I write for hours and then all of a sudden I go, shit, I should go do something else. I got to stop. I got to clean up. I got to take care of this. I got to message back this person. And like, it's so normal to me. It's just what I do, And the thing is that I hope something special and cool and moving comes out of that. And, and I would love for some of the stuff that I create to be something. But, and I also hit a point where I realized that, like, if none of this does anything, if I just write like a bunch of shit that doesn't matter, and I still enjoyed myself because I like doing it. So, I'm not saying that it's the right way or the best way. It just is normal to me. It's my life, So I would say, this conversation, I think what's interesting about it is just, if there's something that you like to do, it just brings you joy. You find fulfillment in it. Maybe it's going for a hike, maybe it's going for a drive, doing whatever it is that you like doing. I don't think you should look at that as like somehow it doesn't matter. It matters. It's just your life. And if it's hanging out with your kid and your wife goofing around on the couch, it matters. It's might be mundane, but that is life. That is the thing. And so in a way, I think we forget about that, and we're trying to look on the horizon to some other thing, like, oh, well, maybe when I'm there, maybe when I'm doing this, then it'll matter. And it's like, no, it matters right now. This is it. You're it. It's you and I having this talk. This is it. This is it. This is what matters, and this seems like nothing, but it's like, no, it's what we do. And, does it have to be something? It doesn't. This is it. We're living it. Right. Okay. So some beer. Okay. This is a new one by Red Truck. Well, I don't know if it's new, but at least it came out recently. And it's called Chili Willy's Cold IPA. I think it's a hilarious name. It's got a big like red Jeep blasting through some snow in like a glacier, like a superhero shot, The Willys truck was known for its huge payload capacity and power for its size. That's exactly what we got going on with our Chili Willy's Cold IPA. This hybrid IPA brewed cold with lager yeast backs a super clean punch. Hop in, losers. We're going for a ride. I think it's hilarious. It's like it's a super silly like can. And you pointed out it's like a 7%er and you don't even notice it. Very flavorful, very fun. Anyway, I brought this beer today, so I'm introducing it, and this isn't an advertisement. It's just Evan and I do this as a tradition. So I don't know. You got any thoughts, Evan?
Yeah. No, it's good. Like for the first sip I had, I was like, oh yeah, like this is good. And after I didn't read the little write up on it before it, but it makes sense that there's sort of like a lager vibe to it because it's very clean and very drinkable for how strong it is. As for I love that though. Hop in, losers. Calling your customers losers. I love that. It's good. I've been enjoying it. All right. Well, I guess I'll say some final thoughts on here in here in some capacity. And this has been a very, one of those conversations that's like it's left me in a sort of like a, not like a lot of closure necessarily, but kind of just my head spinning a little bit in a good way. And, one thing that just sort of emerged here at the end for me, a thought that's emerged is, creativity in the mundane is that like, well, yeah, like that's where creativity in so many ways thrives the best. Creativity doesn't thrive so much in the big, spectacular. You know, like there's actually more limits there. And what it really made me think about was like, you know, we're talking about sort of like Tom Hardy and to a degree like celebrity and all of the stuff where it's like, well, yeah, like celebrity and fame and success, a lot of these things, like these sort of big, spectacular things actually make it harder. Because for a lot of these people, suddenly they're making decisions of like, oh, well, can I work with this person? Or can I say this thing? Can I do that thing? What would happen if, like, there's suddenly all of this shit that enters into the fray with you. Like, and again, these are egoic concerns that start to happen, right? That make you go, it's like, oh, you actually feel really compelled to do this thing, but then you know, it's like either you or maybe you've got representation that's just like, I don't know, like, so it makes it harder to just do the shit. It makes it harder to be creative. But when you stay in a place of, I guess, humility, which is almost another way of saying like in the mundane, I'm staying in the mundane. I'm staying in the place where I don't give a shit about all of this stuff that's going on, because that's where I'm actually free. As a creative person, as an artist, the most free I am is when I don't care about all of that external stuff. Because that's when I'm most free, concentrated, focused, attentive to me just doing what I do. Because all that stuff, as we've talked about so many times on this podcast, like all of those things are distractions. And the more distractions that you have that come, the harder it is to just be truthful, right? To really just put yourself into something, because there's something else that's taken hold. There's something else that's starting to operate and trying to have its say over the thing. And that thing is always going to fuck it up in some way, right? Maybe not entirely, right? But it, like, even like it can just fuck it up in little kinds of ways. And in so many ways as an artist, you're always just trying to get to the most pure expression that you can possibly bring to it. That's part of the suffering of an artist. It's just like, oh, I'm just trying to say this thing honestly. And sometimes you're trying to say that thing honestly when you're going like, oh shit, I'm afraid to say this thing. Right? Or like, for whatever reason, right? I'm afraid to say this thing because of what, you know, it might reveal about who I am. I'm afraid to say this thing because I'm afraid of how that might look to, you know, these people or to such and such. I'm afraid, like, all of those things start creeping in, and then suddenly you just go, okay, I'm going to just dial it back. I'm not going to say it, or I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do the thing, even though I know that's the honest thing to do. Right? That's all restriction. That's all something that is stepping in, that is intruding upon your freedom, your creative freedom. And so this is like, in a kind of way, yeah, this is a place of operating from the mundane, like creativity in that space. Trying to be creative in that spectacular space becomes harder to do. It becomes harder to do. But if you stay kind of in that mundane space, spectacular things can come out of it, right? Which is the funny thing about it. In fact, the most spectacular things will come out of it. So I guess at the end of the day, it's like about really, yeah, like staying humble and making sure that we're going into whatever we're doing creatively from the best place, really. And that is from a place of humility. That is from a place of eliminate all of those distractions of becoming a big deal.
You know, something that dawned on me was that when I started my writing journey, like storytelling creatively, like actually trying to write a story down, I used to wait for inspiration. and I'd be like, oh, I'm inspired, I'll write, and I would usually try to jump on those moments, right? And then, I get some good results because being inspired when you write is helpful and blah, blah, blah. But, I would say now, like, I don't ever wait for inspiration anymore. I literally go out and I fucking look for it. I like hunt it down. Like it's fucking out there and I'm going to get it. And there are days where I'm like, oh my God, I do not want to write anything today. I'm just like, this is just, it's brutal, but I'll write anyway. And I always write at least half an hour, no matter what. And I'll just fucking muscle through it and I'll get something down. But some days they start like that, and then all of a sudden something clicks, and then boom, all of a sudden I'm on to something, and like hours later, I'd say like, like, I don't know, like, I mean, there's like, I've heard that like musicians, right? If you want to be a musician, falling in love with performing on stage, you're not a musician. You got to fall in love with like writing songs, getting together with the band, practicing on your instrument, trying to work out a bridge in this, like just you're trying to figure this shit out. And if that's mundane shit. But if you can fucking like that, man, that is your path, right? And like, man, I fucking love just sitting down with a story and trying to solve a problem, trying to figure out how are we going to do this? And like, I love trying to figure out like, how am I going to make the audience feel this way? How am I going to achieve this? How are we going to figure that out? And at the same time, it's not even that simple. It's like, and also I got to make sure that I meet the character arc, that the dialogue is natural, that the actions, that this is even interesting, and that it connects to the greater, larger story of everything. And, and what's the fucking point of any of this shit anyway? Right. And so, but that's all like, that's just mundane, and so I think that, one of my big takeaways here is like, I'm going to walk away from this and I'm really going to just try to appreciate almost the thing that is like innocuous, like the thing that I don't even notice. Like I get up every fucking morning. Like I'm just having this realization right now. I get up every morning and I'll make a coffee almost always. I'll sit down and I'll write often for hours. And over the last 2 years, I've written over 11.5 million words. And I know that because Grammarly keeps track of this shit. And with 11 point something, 0.5, 0.6, whatever million words that I've written, I have not published a novel. I have not written a script. I have not made a movie. I haven't done anything in the last 2 years. Like I haven't launched any of this shit. And so there's this part of me that's like, oh, well, you haven't really, you haven't published a novel. You haven't written a script. You haven't done this. None of it matters. And it's like, no, it fucking matters. Every fucking day, that's how I live my life. And it's fucking awesome. I love it. I wake up every morning. I'm so fucking excited. And sometimes I'm just like, oh man, I don't have time to write as much as I like today. And I get a little bit bent about it. And it's like, because, you're kind of reminding me that the 11.5 million words that I've written, which most of which no one will ever see, is just as important as the few words out of those million that people will see. And I like this life. And this is what I want to live. This is how I want to live. I want to, and it doesn't have to come with some reward of publishing a novel or doing something like that. Just the process of trying to figure out how to write a novel, because I think that would be a fun thing to do, is the life. It is the fucking thing. And, yeah. And I mean, if I was, I guess I'll finish with this thought. If the little kid version of me got to meet me and saw what I did every day, he would be like, that is fucking cool. I bet he would be so fucking like over the fucking moon about it. Because he wouldn't have any context of like, oh, you need to make money, you need to be famous, you need to do all this shit. He just wanted to tell fucking great stories, and he was playing with his action figures trying to figure out how to do it. And all I'm doing now is I'm trying to figure out how to put it in the context of a novel, which is a little bit different than a script. And it's like, not, whatever. It's the same fucking idea. But the thing is I think, yeah, whatever you're up to, whatever you like. I mean, it doesn't have to be that. And don't compare yourself to me. This is just my journey. You know, if you like fucking building your car and like just making it awesome and making it more powerful, and that fucking fulfills you, like that is the fucking art. That's the mundane fucking, and you're trying to figure out, well, what exhaust do I put on, and how do I put the right filter into this machine to make it fucking get enough air to fucking maximize its power. If that's what you're into, that's what you're fucking into, and that's fucking awesome. If you love it, love it. Like, love that you love it. So, yeah, I'd say, like, you know, there's something about this conversation which is about, like, loving the mundane, you know? Not just, like, attention and creativity, but I think, like love the thing that almost doesn't even seem like it's there.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.